Hi guys, Dr. Simon Hill here, and today what I want to talk about is how I got my first step onto the property investment ladder. So I'm going to try and take you through a number of the key areas that you have to go through to buy any property, but I'll also try and share with you some ideas and some feelings that ultimately made me make that first investment and has allowed me to make further investments moving forward. So I bought my first investment property back in 2018/2019. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it was and still is a 3-bedroomed terraced house with a bathroom upstairs, and that's a big selling point because a lot of smaller terraced houses that are primarily built in the early 1900s, 1910, 1920s tended to have bathrooms downstairs, and unsurprisingly people don't love going downstairs to go to the toilet in the middle of the night. However, this house was up for sale for £120,000, and I managed to get the price down to £118,000, which wasn't a huge discount. And admittedly, in hindsight, knowing what I know now with my experience of buying 6 properties, I realised that actually I should have offered lower. There's certain negotiation principles, like things like anchoring, where you offer a ridiculously low price, let's say £100,000, and you go up incrementally, but go up incrementally in small specific numbers. So rather than just going up by £1,000 and £2,000, £3,000, you go up by £1,742, because that suggests there is some thought that's gone into that number, rather than just I'm using a round number and I'm just going to go up a little bit and whatnot. So negotiation is a really key part of buying any property, whether it's an investment property or a property that you want to buy for yourself. So start low, and also be aware of what's going on. Obviously, I looked at lots of properties when I was first looking for this first investment property. Ideally, I wanted it to be relatively close to where I live so that I could service it. I could pop round if things go wrong, or whatever the case may be. There was a security there. And I wanted to self-manage it. I didn't want to pay for a letting agent to manage my property. And I still don't use a letting agent to manage my properties. It does create a few little headaches from time to time, and usually on days that you don't want it to happen. So New Year's Day, my birthday. But again, that's the choice you make. So I bought this property, £118,000, after looking at, I think, at least 4 or 5 different properties. The person that was selling the property had recently got divorced, which is a signal. It's a signal to say, I've recently got divorced, therefore there's a good chance that they are potentially in a bit of a rush to sell their property. And actually, I should have utilised that information far better than I did. I still got a bit of money off. £2,000 is better than nothing, but I think I probably could have done more. But hey ho, you live and learn. And sometimes you only learn by doing it. It's easy for me to say this to you now, but chances are, will you apply these when you're in the rush of putting a bid in for a property? The estate agent calls you back, and no, yes, no, so on and so forth. So anyway, 118 grand. And where did that 118 grand come from is a pretty good question to answer next. Unsurprisingly, I didn't have £118,000 just lying in the bank. But what I was able to generate was a quarter of that, which is about my maths is terrible, clearly, £30,000. So £30,000 times 4 is 120, so a little bit less than £30,000. So I had £30,000 that I'd managed to accumulate over time. And that money just doesn't come from anywhere. It wasn't inheritance. It wasn't a lump sum or anything like that. It came from hard work, saving money, not going on holidays when, perhaps your friends are going on holiday. Sometimes you've got to put a little bit of money aside and not go crazy. Not having the latest iPhone. I've had iPhone, the Generation 1 AirPods for probably the last 7 or 8 years. Admittedly, I have to replace them every couple of years because the battery doesn't last particularly well. But accumulating that deposit that's one of the big gateways. One of the big tasks you need to complete to be able to get onto the property investment ladder. So getting that money together is really important. So please start that journey now if you've not already started it. And don't lose patience either, because it's very easy to start accumulating. It doesn't accumulate as fast as you want it to. And then instead you decide, I'll go and put it into the stock market. I'm going to go invest in Tesla or any other specific stock. If you want to invest in the stock market, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I would certainly suggest you use things like index funds to spread the potential downside, because all you need to do is for one person to make one bad decision and whatever you've invested in goes down very quickly. Could go up for sure, but unfortunately we tend to hear the downsides far more often. So even if it's just putting it into a regular old savings account, it's better than nothing. So again, for me, £30,000 is roughly what I needed. I also needed to pay some stamp duty. So the stamp duty is basically an additional tax for buying a property. You have to buy that, you have to sell there, you have to pay that for a property you're going to live in, but you also have to pay more if you're buying a property to rent out. So the government have got to get, of course, their little bit extra, and you've got to pay it. So it is what it is. You've got to accept it, and as far as I'm aware, there's no way of really getting around it. So just suck it up, pay it, and move on. You need to obviously find a mortgage, because if you've got £30,000, 75% loan to value mortgages generally is where the buy-to-let mortgage is most favourable for most people. Obviously, I think at the time I had more than £30,000, and I was going to go for a different type of mortgage where I would put, let's say, 40% down rather than 25%. But of course, what that then would do is lock up my money in this property when I could invest that money sooner in another one. And I remember my mortgage broker at the time telling me that, and it was like a light bulb moment. I thought, oh God, yeah, of course. And you can put less than 25% down, but the interest rates that you pay are then significantly higher. So again, something else to consider. Consider how you're going to buy the property. Are you going to buy it as a company, or are you going to buy it as a personal asset to you? Personal assets are fine. They're fairly, there is lots more on this, so I'm just giving you a very brief overview. But buying it in your own personal name is fine. But generally, it depends on how much tax you pay in your job. If you are paying £40,000, if you are earning over £50,000 and you are coming close to the tax threshold, then sometimes starting up a limited company might be better. And in the flip side, if you're only earning £20,000 a year in your job, then actually buying it as a private individual may well be better. But again, that is very much a question that you need to ask an accountant and get some professional advice on. So these are just kind of basic ideas, and this is what I did. So I bought the houses originally in my personal name, but then when it came to a point when we bought more houses, we then set up a company to manage those as well. So we've got the mortgage broker who's got the mortgage sorted for us. brokers earn their money often through an initial fee or a commission from the mortgage company that they're recommending. So make sure that when they recommend you a mortgage, that it's the right type of mortgage for you. Generally, they will choose a pretty good option, but it's just worth looking through the paperwork, is what I say, just to double check. Don't assume that all mortgage brokers are perfect and shiny, because some of them just simply aren't. So just be aware of that. So you got your mortgage, you've put your offer in, whether it's a cheeky offer, whether it's a sensible offer, you'll get a terrifying phone call from the estate agent saying, congratulations, they've accepted your offer. And then you think, oh my God, it is here, we're off. And you get carried away with the momentum, because they'll then ask you about who's your solicitor. And you think, oh my God, I didn't realize I needed a solicitor, especially if you've never bought a house before. So you have to find a solicitor. Well, who are you going to find? You're going to go somewhere local? Are you going to, my solicitor is based up in Newcastle, because they were the most reasonable choice I could find price-wise back in the day. And I've just continued using them ever since, because I like the relationship I have with them, and they're pretty professional. Now, the legal side of things, conveyancing, tends to take a long time. There are lots of searches, things going on. No, it may well be that I'm just using the wrong solicitors, but based on research I've read, it tends to take somewhere around 3 months to get the deal done. It can be done a lot faster, but on average, you're looking at about 3 months. But of course, the other thing is that the sellers have got to find another place to live, and there are lots of other things that need to be right before you can move forward. So, got the offer in, you've chosen your solicitor, you've sent all that information to the estate agent, you've sent all the information to the solicitor, you've paid the solicitor a little bit of money to get the ball rolling with them. You tend to pay the bulk of the fees at the end of the transaction. So, and the fees, again, from what I've paid in the past, tend to be about £1,000 to £1,500 for the legal costs of the process. And of course, that's not including mortgage fees, the deposit you'll have to send to the solicitor who will deal with all of the transaction stuff, the additional stamp duty that you'll need to pay, and any other elements that I've forgotten off the top of my head, but they're certainly the main ones. And then 3 months later, you will get a house and you will get the keys. And oh my gosh, again, it's a crazy day. It goes like a weird dip. You have the highs of, oh, I'm looking at properties, this is exciting, I've put a offer in, and then you get to this point where they say, yes, we'll take the money. And then all of a sudden it's a bit of a dip, because it's a bit of a terrifying process. And I still think it's a terrifying process, even though I've bought 6 houses. But then you start building up the momentum, and then you've got the keys. You go around the first time and you think, oh my God, is this the house I went to see 3-4 months ago? Because there's no furniture in there, so it looks very different. You start noticing cracks in the walls. You notice stuff that's not painted properly. All sorts of good, bad, dirty, all sorts of things. So for us, fortunately, our first property was left in a reasonable condition. It was it was fairly obvious that it wasn't perfect when we looked at it, but it had recently had a full electrical rewire. So all of the wires had been ripped out and new ones put back in, and the marks were still visible on the wall where that had happened. So that wasn't the greatest, but I knew that the electrics were good, or at least I assumed they were good based on that information. And they were. The electrics have always been pretty good with that property, as has the boiler, which is another fairly big expense overall. And I think within 2 weeks of getting the keys, we had tenants in there, advertised on Facebook, loads of people are interested. I ran an open house where people just came, looked round, and then had an application process where I got a Google form, asked lots of information, lots of questions, got them to share references, from their workplaces, pay slips to confirm that they were being paid X amount and that they were able to cover the cost of the rent. And one of the little things tips I would suggest to property investors when you've got a property and you're advertising it is advertise it at a reasonable rate. £900 a month, £1,000 a month, whatever that number is for your specific area and for the specific property. But think about also what, or give the option to allow a bit of a bidding scenario. So get people to apply through a Google form or something like that. But the last question, write down, you've had lots of interest, and obviously if you haven't had lots of interest, then don't say that, don't lie. But if you have had lots of interest, as I always have done for my properties, I've had lots of interest, how much would you be willing to pay? And don't choose a tenant based on that number. Use it as a factor, but definitely don't use it as the only thing you consider. Look at what they've said, look at what all of the other answers to their work, their commitments, if they've got dogs, cats, etc. And make a decision based on all of those factors put together. And also, be a responsible landlord as well. Don't, if there are problems with a house, not safety problems, because you have to get those sorted out, that is a mandatory. But if there are problems with the property, maybe it does need some paint, maybe the carpets are very worn, then don't just grab all of that rent and say, okay, well, you offered £100 more than everybody else, I'm going to take all of that. Be reasonable. Say, okay, well, actually, I will, I'll charge you £50 less on the assumption that you paint the walls. And okay, well, that's quite a good deal, assuming they're good painters. But again, it's another thing to consider. So I think that's kind of, the only final thing to say with this property is that the tenants that moved in 6 years ago are still there. They're great tenants. I generally try and increase the rent every year. It's not the most pleasant of things to do, but as and when the tenants move out, they are going to have a huge shock if you don't increase the rents. So, over a 5-year period, rents in that local area have, certainly in this case, have gone up by about £200 a month. And that's the scenario I'm currently facing, that actually I've put the price up, but I've not put it up by a huge amount. And so now, we need to try and bring a little bit more equilibrium into the scenario. But again, we've got great tenants. I've got a great relationship with the tenants. So things do go wrong, as they have done. We've had, this property in particular has had 3 windows that have broken. The hinges, not so much the glass. We've had, you have to have your boiler checks, so that's a mandatory thing every year. You have to have your electrical checks every 5 years. You've got, what else has gone? We had a leaking roof. We've had a tap that wouldn't switch off. And I think that's about it for this property. Oh, fences. We've had new fences put in as well. So it's something, there are little headaches. There are things that go wrong, but I think as long as you recognise that it's a business, it's not your money, it's your business's money. And if the business requires something to be done, an investment to be made, an expense to be paid to keep the business running, i.e. the boiler to be fixed, etc., then get it paid. Don't worry yourself about that kind of stuff, because I've done that. I've worried about how much something's going to cost, when actually now something happens, I know exactly who to call. I don't ask for the price, I just get them to fix it, and I know that the price they're going to give me is going to be an honest and fair price. So that's it about my first property. I'll perhaps do some more about other properties as we move forward. But like, subscribe, the usual bits and bobs. But share your thoughts. What do you think? have you got any questions? I'd love to answer any questions about this, because it's something that is, you know, is good. Yeah, it's a good investment. I found it a good investment, but also it's something I really enjoy, working with tenants, and again the relationships that I have with my tenants. So there is more to it than just the money, you know, and also of course there's the long-term wealth potential that, you know, hopefully it will give me, and yeah, potentially my family as well. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all of that jazz, and I will see you next time.